It's good to see everybody that's here. And welcome, Jane. And were you able to hear me? You're able to hear me? Okay, cool. All right, wonderful. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and begin. This is number 3 of the series of 7 workshops in the Elite Mind Mastery course. And this actually is one of my favorite workshops to do of the 7 transformations. One of my favorite in the sense that it has brought me so many blessings over the last 30 years, actually. And the one that we're going to work with today is transformation number 3 in the series, and it's called Remaking Your Past, with a subtitle of Neutralizing Trauma and Emotional Conditioning from Your Youth. And it's naturally the third one in the series because the primary transformation that always has to happen first of them all is getting your right and left hemisphere in a good, working, positive relationship with each other. And that's true because I sometimes use the analogy of 2 sisters, imagining in this thought experiment, let's say, 2 sisters hire me to coach them. And they're asking me to become their singing coach. Although I can't sing. I can't hold a tune anymore. And so we get into the session, and they get into this argument with each other. And I have to say, ladies, stop. Okay, you hired me to be your singing coach, but I can't be your singing coach if you're going to squabble with each other. This will just slow things down. And so I get them to pay attention, and then they get into another squabble. And then I have to kind of do that again. So that little analogy gives you an idea of why. The analogy is that each of the sisters represent one hemisphere. And the studies, the split brain studies, compellingly show that the hemispheres can get into a lockdown with each other where they're arguing. I remember a client from this is probably earlier in the summer when we began our sessions. She described to me, she says, I have screaming matches in my head between the left and the right hemisphere. And we had to handle those first before we could do anything else of substance, make any headway in personal growth and development. And then the second one, the second transformation is once you've got your team in place now, you've drafted and you've taught your left and right hemisphere how to work well together, better together, to develop. You did like a team building thing with them, and so now they're working well together, and you have a team. And now how do you best use that team on a regular basis? And that's super meetings. And that's what we covered 2 weeks ago. And I was happy to hear a number of people, sent me feedback from what they experienced 2 weeks ago, that they were working on an issue, and that super meeting format worked really well for them. And what I've learned about that one, I like a lot as well because I use it regularly, is that if I'm stressed about something, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being super, super stressed, freaked out, and 1 being not stressed at all, that when I'm in the 8, 9, 10 range and I begin a super meeting, by the time I'm complete with that super meeting, 30 to 45 minutes later, my stress level has dropped from that high rate down to a 3, 2, or a 1. And it consistently does that if you take advantage of that newfound relationship with your right and left hemisphere. It's an amazing process. And so I absolutely encourage you to go ahead and watch that video from 2 weeks ago. That one is up now. It was up last week. So there are now 2 videos in the 7 series, a series of 7, on the playlist. And now we're into this 3rd one. And now we're able to successfully, with the help of our left and right hemisphere, to begin to take a look at emotional conditioning and trauma from our past that got assimilated when we were really young, from 0 to 12 years old, sometimes even into teenage years. We can experience that. And that now we're in the perfect place to be able to address that. And we weren't in the perfect place before, sometimes for another reason. Because when the left and right hemisphere are still at odds with each other, sometimes there's active animosity between the hemispheres. And when that is present, it is very difficult for oneself, who's experiencing episodes of that, to have compassion for themselves, to give themselves a break, as we say. And to do the work in healing your past, you absolutely need to have compassion for your younger self that went through, some of those difficult times from 0 to 12 years old, and went through the difficult and challenging learnings that your younger self did. So having compassion for oneself is a prerequisite in order to be successful with what we're going to do today. And I'm going to give you one example. I have any number that I've done, but this one here was let's say interesting. It was almost 30 years ago. I seem to tracked it back to was the summer of 1990, and I was in between marriages, and I was extremely lonely, and it was really painful. And I realized, from the work that I'd already been doing with people, that there was something in my past about this, because this was not the first time I was experiencing this loneliness. It goes back all the way to my early 20s, and then prior to that even. And one of the things, the basics that we're going to do today, well, I'll walk through this first, and then talk about the overview of the process we're going to do today. So I was aware that something in my past was responsible for me experiencing this, because I'd experienced it many times before. And I knew from my professional training that I could work with that. And so my first step was to identify what was the original event. What was the very first time in my life that I experienced that loneliness? And I identified where the loneliness was in my body, and how really, really uncomfortable, painful it was. It was like a big, big emptiness. And I used that emptiness, that feeling, the horrible emptiness, as like a marker to track backwards in time and go backwards in a reverse chronology, using that feeling to sort for other experiences where that feeling was present. And I came up in my mind with a little list, but the one I got back to that was the earliest one was when I was 16 years old. Yeah. Now, it's interesting, I said earlier that the most formative years are from 0 to 12 years old, generally speaking. But it is possible to have an event that occurs in your teenage years that is equally as, well, I'm gonna say devastating, that leaves a scar on one's soul. And this one was in the teenage years, simply because it had a lot to do with puberty and becoming a man with sexual feelings, and and the ability to, have feelings for the opposite sex. And at 16 years old, it was right between freshman and sophomore year in high school, right at the almost at the beginning of the summer. I'd had a girlfriend in freshman year, and we were, as they say, we were going together. And within 2 weeks of summer vacation, I got dumped. No better way to say it. And I would call her house, and no answer. And then when her mom answered, she wouldn't talk to me. And that particular summer, the whole summer was for me at the time, the perception of it was a super trauma. Although, now I look back on it now, and lots of us look back on being dumped after our first love, and, it's painful, but we look back on it and we figure that we learned something from that. But when you're right in the middle of it, oh my goodness, it's horrible. And I remember that whole summer just moping around the house. Both my mom and dad worked, so I had the house to myself, moping around the house, with this deep sadness. And I remember, don't ask me why, we had this record, a Peter, Paul, and Mary record, and it had all their top hits on it from back then. And it was a 33 RPM, one of those platters, vinyl, I guess they call it, more valuable today than they were back then. And all summer I played that. Every time then, of course, I heard any one of those songs from that album, it always, triggered that, bad feeling once again. And there was my event. I had identified the event. And then I knew what to do with it. Once I identified that earliest event, then I could initiate the Remaking My Past process, which was to go through, and I remember exactly where I was. I was out walking doing this process on one of the canals here in the Phoenix area. Phoenix area is crisscrossed with canals, that are used to, irrigate farmers' fields and irrigate lawns, through the whole Phoenix metro area and beyond, the suburban areas and out into the, into the agricultural areas. So, and there's paths to walk alongside all of these. And I was walking alongside one of the canals, and I remember it vividly. And I started the Remaking My Past process by imagining that I went back in time to meet up with my younger self, my 16-year-old self. And using my creativity and my imagination and my intuition, I engaged in this conversation with him. Told him in the first step, I told him I came back here to rescue you, because I met up with him like right at the end of freshman year before he got dumped. This is an important distinction, that I met up with him before the event actually occurred. And so I told him something's going to happen, or could happen in the next couple of weeks. And I told him I was from his future, and that I came back here to help him with that situation. And then I explained to him what happened to me at the same juncture in life, what happened to me, how I got dumped, and how it was really painful. And I told him, you don't have to go through that. I learned all the lessons you need to learn. I'm going to give you my lessons so that you don't have to go through that. And I also explained to him that I concluded that being alone was horrible. And I told him, then I made it so. The strategy I had is I had to always be with somebody after that. And I said, I want you not to have to do that. You don't have to do that. You don't always have to have people with you like I did. That was because when I didn't have people, I was horribly lonely, and you don't have to go through that. And then I said, what you can do is you can do something different. You can realize that you are your own best company and that you make your life and that you create the fun that is possible for you, and that you create relationships that last. And then I gave him 3 choices for how to handle this upcoming situation that might happen to him with getting dumped, how to handle it. 3 choices, 3 alternatives that each of which would be better than what I did. I took the lonely route. And I don't remember what the other 2 were, but I remember the one that he chose. I gave him this choice of these 3, and I said, now I want you to know you can choose from any of these 3, or you can make one up all on your own for how to handle that situation. I trust you. I just want you to have choice. I want you to be ready, because I was not prepared. I was not ready. I was caught totally off guard, and I made some wrong choices that caused me much, much pain during the next decades of my life. And I don't want you to go through that. And you have everything you need to make the choices amongst those 3 that I've given you, or you might make up a 4th one completely on your own. And so after offering, this encouragement and telling him my trust and confidence in him, I sent him off in my daydream. This is in my structured daydream, and I'm still walking down alongside the canal. And I watch him as I move to the side of the stream of time, what he does. And amazingly, he decided to go down to a town about 40 miles south of the Twin Cities, where I grew up, where he and I grew up in Minnesota, called New Prague. That was the name of the little town down there. And he had cousins down there. And he decided to spend the summer with 3 cousins that were living there, three guys that are still alive to this day. And New Prague is actually a fun town. It has a lake and a beach. And I remember somebody had a Corvette, one of those Corvettes back then, the 2-seaters, and was able to give us rides, me and my cousins. And we went to the beach every day during the summer and had interactions with girls. And it just had a blast through that whole summer. And you can tell from my state of being right now as I'm describing this is what I was experiencing walking down that canal. And when he completed it, believe me, I met up with him again in the stream of time and congratulated him and was over the top in telling him how proud I was of his choice and how he handled it, how it brought me joy. And then we kind of merged together in a way and decided that we were going to live our life sort of together, but in parallel universes, and that we could be there for each other. And we decided to do that. And ever since then, I have not experienced the loneliness. And, some of you know that I've had a few marriages, and so there were a couple more after, there were a few. And there were in-between times. And I was okay. But the biggest thing I'm grateful for, what my younger self did 30 years ago, is that today I'm very happily single. I have 2 sons. And when I say very happily, to be a little more specific, I experience myself as my own best company. And of course, what helped that along was getting my left and right hemisphere in line, because knowing that I have a left and right hemisphere, each of which has its own personality and makes its own choices about what it likes and dislikes, and brings a lot of diversity to the table between the 2 of them. Knowing that I have them I'm never alone. I always have them to talk to. And then many of you have also known that we're going to probably do this. No, more than probably, 2 weeks from now, we're going to do the fourth transformation, which is enhancing your native, natural, spiritual life. And enhancing it in such a way that you come to the awareness and realization that you have at least one consciousness who exists in the non-physical that cares a great deal about you and that welcomes your communication if you want to do it. So some people talk about that as like prayer. But one of the things when you really enhance your native natural spirituality, you can make those communications a two-way communication, not where you're always praying, asking for something or praying, but where you're actually having an interactive communication. You know, I often refer to it as my profound self, my deeper self, myself that was aware before I came into this lifetime. And so having that also added to the richness of my life when I'm so-called alone, having a left and a right hemisphere, and having that experience, that remaking my past experience back when I was 16, and having a spiritual support from the non-physical makes my life right now much, much richer as it's evolved down through the years. And so that experience I had when I was 16, and then me in 1990, remaking that past, has brought me tremendous joy and relieved me of so much negative emotional feelings and trauma in the time since 1990. That was 30 years ago. Now I've had there was 4 or 5 others remaking my past processes for different other situations that I may get a chance to share with you later. But I think that's enough of a one to get us jump started on what this transformation is all about, this remaking your past. And so I want to just check in briefly with folks to just see, I want to ask you the question, how are you coming into today's workshop? And everybody doesn't have to answer, but get 1 or 2 or 3 of you. Just go ahead and unmute yourself. So I'd like to hear how you're coming into, maybe based on if you read my email from yesterday describing this remaking your past process. Okay, go ahead, Cheryl.
Okay. We worked on this before, and I find myself stuck in a pattern of huge fear dealing with this potential neck surgery. That is the most dangerous surgery I've ever have gone through in all my 47 years. And I have been overly stressed, overly frightened, telling me that I could die on the table. Forget about dying. It's even undergoing such an extensive 15-hour surgery that I've never, ever can't even come close to what I've gone through. I've had my neck fused before. 15 years ago, it was the worst surgery I've ever gone through, the worst. So I feel I'd like to neutralize that because I don't like living in this fear and overwhelm and waking up every 2 hours, dealing with the pain. and just like a very frightened child who's all alone.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for sharing that. And we'll see how that goes here today. Make that application. Okay. One of the things, I think I'll say it right now because the question is there for me to talk about. So one of the things that you'll need to do, Cheryl, and all of us, when we do this and go through this during this workshop, is we need to we need to identify the earliest event in our life where we had something close to that kind of a fear. So it sounds like you've got the fear going into this upcoming surgery, and you had a previous surgery that was very, very difficult. And that fear that you experience from that you've learned from that, can you track that back further in your life, that kind of fear?
Yeah.
And how far back can you go?
Child.
Okay. And do you have an event that comes to mind?
Yes.
Okay. And how old were you during that event?
I was a baby, even up to 2 years old and 5 years old.
Okay. Up to 2 years old and up to 5 years old. And so that there was fear present. Are you saying that?
Horrible.
Okay. And even as a baby, is that true?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that's good that we've identified that already here right at the outset, because that's the experience that you'll be working with to remake your past with. Are you with me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Appreciate that. I'm going to put you back on mute. And yep. Okay. And someone else. Just one or two more people. Go ahead, Denise, and then Carrie.
Mine is what I've been dealing with a lot lately is sadness, like overwhelming sadness,
Mm-hmm.
to the point where sometimes tears are just rolling down. You know how sometimes I don't know if we cause ourselves to cry or you kind of feel it coming, or you have a reason, something just happened and then you cry over a movie or whatever. But mine, I can do that, but also it's like sometimes there's just tears just coming down my cheeks.
And you're calling that sadness? It's the label you're
Sadness.
giving to it. Okay. And do you have a sense of where that is located in your body? Like, what does it specifically feel like? And it could be just right in this area where where the tears are coming from.
Yeah, I think so. Usually I tend to find it somewhere in my body somewhere, but that is an issue that I'm dealing a lot with right now is my eyesight.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think that's probably where I'm feeling it. And then the tears just, I was at the doctor's office the other day and he handed me a Kleenex. He was telling me some, difficult news and things. And he reached over and handed me a Kleenex and I didn't even know I needed one. So I thought that was very kind and sweet.
Yeah.
But that's how it just is coming,
Yeah.
that easy.
So when you think about that sadness, can you track that back further in your life? Or is this I'm going to assume this is not a brand new feeling. True?
No, I mean, it's elevated right now with just the eye stuff, but no, I think I've had sadness on and off in my life, all my life. I mean, even as a child.
Yeah.
Being alone, feeling alone, being left alone. But I was pretty good at entertaining myself. I think maybe my left and right hemispheres were on board with each other at a very young age, and they got along fine. We just played and, entertained ourselves. But then as
Yeah.
I got older, then that, and into the world, that didn't always work.
Yeah.
So I think, I don't know, I always kind of go back to 5 years old because that was when my brother was born. A lot of transition. I didn't know it. My sisters pieced it back and forth with me. I didn't know a lot of stuff that was going on because there was so much trauma. I just blocked everything out. So you can't be selective usually. If you're blocking out bad stuff, you're also blocking out good stuff. So in my later life, I'm starting to piece some of that together, timelines and things. So I think it was 5. Around that age is when I remembered sitting in the play box, sandbox, all by myself, and just wondering, where is everybody? I mean, I was only 5 years old, it's like, and I entertained myself all day long by myself. I was like, does anybody know where I'm at?
Yeah.
Where, if I'm okay or something like that. So,
And the sadness and aloneness was there?
I think it probably was because, again, at times when I became aware, I mean, most of the time I was just playing and I was fine. Then all of a sudden I'd become aware, like, where is everybody? And so that felt sad because nobody cared, or I don't know if I interpreted it that way, but nobody cared. Nobody was around. Nobody wondered if I'd wander off into the creek or.
Yeah.
So that seemed sad to me.
Yeah. And thank you for telling us that, because what you just said leads us to one of the other steps. There's a 7-step process we're going to be going through. But one of the steps is identifying one of the things to do in preparation for doing the 7 steps is to identify what you concluded. And so what you just said is, everybody's left me alone.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the basis of the conclusion, the basis of the sadness and loneliness there. And so there's a few more pieces to that will come up besides, everybody's left me alone.
And I concluded that I was alone.
Yeah, I'm alone.
And that I would always be alone, and I would always have to take care of myself.
Yeah.
By myself.
So that
I would survive.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the complete. I would go ahead and write that down. In fact, everybody, if you want to participate in this, go ahead and be sure you have notes. Have something you can take notes with. So that's the core strategy that you assimilated. And I use the word that you learned, but I put learned in quotes because it wasn't really a learning like you learned a fact like 2 + 2 is 4. Mm-hmm. You learned and assimilated a belief that was associated and locked in with the sad emotional feeling. And from that experience forward, those two would be locked in together. Yeah.
Sad and alone.
Yeah.
We're locked together.
Well, yeah, the feeling and alone. Yeah. And the conclusion, the belief. Yeah. That I'm alone. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's one of the pieces that we need to have in our notes in order to begin that 7-step process.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And Carrie, let's see if I can unmute you. I think you have to unmute yourself. I think I can hear you now.
Yeah. First, I just want to apologize. I'm very far behind on all of this. Um, I work for the Secretary of State in the elections office, and
Well,
I've been under
let's all of
major,
us
major,
offer you a round of congratulations for completing the task.
it hasn't stopped. And I've
Mm,
had to deal with very abusive people. So
mm,
I've been trying to just take care of myself. But just a couple of things that you talk about. I when I things come up for me, I put myself in counseling because I want to deal with it. And I noticed in my life that I kept bringing up people at work that were like tyrants to me. The last deputy director in our office was doing everything she could to get rid of me and was lying to me. And I like to come from truth. If I make a mistake, I'll say it, whatever. Anyway, she was on a mission to get rid of me. So I went for counseling, and I'm happy to say that she left in July. But what she taught me that I carried with me all through childhood was that I was a bad girl. And when situations came up, I always felt that it was my fault and that I was the bad girl. And the truth is, I'm not a bad girl. I might be direct on how I talk, but there's no malice or anything behind how I talk, that I'm not a bad girl. So I bless her for coming in my life because I finally ended that. I don't have that anymore. If I see it happening, I'm right on it. So, and I
yeah.
keep, I tell myself I'm not a bad girl. But now what I am dealing with is relationship. So I'm in charge of the Facebook page for my high school. We've been out of high school for 50 years now. And we've had some virtual calls and stuff. And I have connected with somebody from high school. And it has really brought up, I've never been married. I've And in my head, I've always had that relationships are not my thing. Job is, I can get, I have great jobs and stuff. But so he came into my life, and I had called it during my BLE program after I lost I gave myself to a certain date, and then I was going to open myself up to allowing a relationship to come in. So as it started, I was really in my head. So I went into counseling, and what I came up with, and this is where I can use what we're doing now, but my family has always made fun of me because I've never been married. And it's been a joke in my family. And so I always think that I'm not worthy of true love. I was with someone for 14 years, but let me tell you, that was not true love. And any relationships I had after that were nothing to really speak of. And so I have carried this with me all my life, that everybody, my nieces and nephews, everybody got married except me. And it was always a joke. Or somebody had a baby and they thought I was upset because I didn't have a baby. And I've carried that, and I am so working on it, because right now it's just a nice friendship. He's in California. I'm not going to see him for a while. I'm in Washington. And so it's a friendship. But for me, I've always had waiting for Prince Charming to show up at the door and rescue me. And, it's just all those things. And I'm learning that relationships are very different now. And but what I have to keep saying to myself is that I'm worthy of true love, no matter how I look, whether I'm big, little, whatever. Because I always put oh, well, I need to lose this so much weight to be in one. But then I see women who are huge, they're in relationships. But for me, it's just, I'm going to say since I was in junior high, you know, in those teen years, it was pretty tough. I had women who were jealous of me because they liked someone and I was good friends with the guy. And I mean, I would have that all the time, but I was never in a relationship with him. We were just friends. But the bottom line is, even to this day, my family, you know, I don't even tell them now really that I'm talking to someone because it's such a taboo for me
Yeah.
about relationship.
Yeah. So thank you for telling us all that. Yeah. And you say it goes back to junior high, best you can tell? Right?
Yeah, I'm going to say it started in junior high because my nieces and nephews weren't born then.
You're what?
My nieces and nephews,
Hmm.
they all weren't born then, but
Mm-hmm.
my oldest brother was 18 years older than me. The other one was 11. So I was an aunt very young. So a couple of my nieces and nephews are more like brothers and sisters to me. But, you know, when I think about in junior high, you know, I've always had a weight problem. Maybe not really overweight, but in my head, I thought, you know, and so people were not sometimes were not very nice in junior high, and it hurt. And then you know, people can be cruel. And I didn't have the right tools then, neither did my parents. But yeah, it goes back to wanting to belong, want to be part of. What's wrong with me? Why did I never get married? Why didn't anybody want to marry me? You know, I go through the whole thing, and it goes back to thinking, you know, what my family said and believing what they told me. So I really have to work on that.
Yeah. And so the earliest you can recollect is then junior high on that. And
Yeah.
you've also given us a hint about the belief that you took on back then that people can be mean and cruel.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something wrong with me. There might be something wrong with me. And so I'm going to, and how did you cope with that then? So I'm going to, you just fill in the blank there.
Did a lot of crying.
Yeah.
I don't know, somehow, you know, I think the truth is I've always been very sociable, and I have a lot of good friends. So I made it through with friends, not with family, friends. I've
Okay.
always had a good core of friends to help me, to remind me who I am.
Yeah.
And I think that was the way I made it through, because I'm very sociable. So if you don't like me, that really can hurt me.
Yeah. So
'Cause I
you
worked out with-
became good at being sociable and gathering friends.
Yep, I have very good friends.
So that was what I call the compensating strategy.
Mm,
So that you could feel like you belonged. That makes sense?
yes. Mm,
Okay. All right. So when you do yours, then if you want to write that down, what we just said, these are all words that you used. So you gave me hints there. People can be cruel and hurt me. So I'm going to be sociable to get people to like me and have good friends. So I don't have to experience that pain, or however you would describe that. So I don't have to, what would you say?
So I don't have to be alone.
Alone? Yeah. Okay, write that one down. So I don't have to be alone. And so this is an example, just like the example I gave of myself. Something happened when I was 16. Something happened when you were in junior high, and it stays with us. It doesn't necessarily ruin our lives completely, but it gets triggered every once in a while, sometimes more often than we want.
Mm-hmm.
It gets triggered, and that old feeling, the old bad feeling comes back.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're about today with the Remaking Your Past process is neutralizing that feeling
Mm-hmm.
so that you're neutral.
Mm-hmm.
Not even that you have to be happy, although, I think after I told you my story and how my younger person, how they chose to handle it by going to spend the summer with his cousins, that that was pretty happy. Yeah. And so I'm very glad you brought that out, because other people are going to have, not the exact same circumstances, but there's enough similarities that people can see the pattern that something happened and you drew a conclusion about that and you decided to enact a strategy so that you could avoid something, like avoid being alone, and so that you could have fun with friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think the big word for me is alone. I could relate when you were talking.
Yeah.
Because I'm 68 years old. I'm by myself. I could be retiring in about 5 years. I don't have any thought of retiring right now because, God willing, my health is still really good. But I don't want to grow old alone. And it got a little scary.
Yeah.
I can go be with family and stuff, but I really would like to be with someone. And but I've had to really work on myself to know that I'm worthy of it. I didn't think I was worthy of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll see with what we accomplished today if we could take another big piece of improvement,
Mm-hmm.
take some more ground on the way to more happiness and joy. Yeah. And get you ready for some future possibilities.
Yep.
Yeah. So once again, thank you, Carrie.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to put you back on mute.
I
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't catch that last word.
was just saying, I thought I could mute myself, but I guess go ahead because your mute did go.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're already, we could say, into the process here. And we've laid out some bits and pieces, and we're going to pull it all together to get us prepared to do the 7-step structured daydream process itself. So to do a little recap, in order to do this exercise, in order to do this transformation, you need to have something that happens in your life that has some, emotional discomfort to it that happens on a regular basis. Like a good representative example of something that upsets you in some way on a more regular basis than you want to have happen. And that when it happens, you have this sense, This has happened many times before in my life. And if you can come up with an experience like that, that happened, let's say something that triggered something for you in the recent past, last week or the week before, or a month ago, or maybe a few months ago, something that happened that put you into really an uncomfortable state, an emotionally uncomfortable state, maybe even emotionally painful for a while before you could like work yourself out of it. And you had this knowing that it came from your past, that you've had it many times before. So once you identify that current situation that happens from time to time that triggers an emotional response from your past, that's your starting point. Whatever the current day thing is that is happening. And then you notice the feeling, you notice the emotional aspects to it. And it's good if you can notice where it is in your body. And get more conversant with that, being able to describe how and where it's in your body. Like sometimes it's a feeling in the pit of your stomach that's really uncomfortable or even emotionally painful, or a tightness in your chest, or a tightness in your shoulders, or an emptiness of some sort that you feel in your body, maybe in the heart area, or something that you're experiencing in your head. And the reason it's important to spend some time identifying the emotional aspect of what you're going through is because that's what you use. The emotional aspect is what you use to sort backwards in time to discover other events where that same feeling was present. It's a little bit like let's say that you go into this cave, and I don't know if you remember the book. I think it was Huckleberry Finn, a Mark Twain book, where Huckleberry Finn lived on the banks in the Mississippi, and where he lived, there was a lot of caves along the banks of the Mississippi, and you can get lost in these caves like labyrinths. And in order to be safe, if you were going to go in and explore some of these caves, it was one of the tactics was to take a great big ball of kite, string, and leave it at the beginning, one end at the beginning tied to a rock, and then unroll it as you're going into the cave, so that you knew exactly what your way out is. So it's like we're using, in a sense, the emotional aspect of the experience as like the ball of kite string, and we use the emotional experience to track back along the string to events from our past in a reverse order. And like you, for example, Carrie, got all the way back to junior high. There could be shades of it even before that, but if there are, they will occur to you if there are other events that are along that ball of string that are younger. They will occur to you, and the same with you, Denise. That brought you back to the 5-year-old one, and Cheryl brought you back to the baby part of your life. So once you've then identified, to the best of your ability, the original event, the very first one. So, for example, in mine, what happened there, that was the very first time I ever got dumped. It wasn't going to be such a thing that would be any younger. I wouldn't be dumped at 5 years old because, I'm not old enough to to experience a relationship like that. So that was the earliest one for me. And it's really useful to find that earliest one, the very first one. And if you're working in that range of 12 and under, and you identify one at, let's say, there's something that happened to me at 7 years old. And it's good to confirm that that's the first one by thinking, okay, was there anything prior to 7 where that same feeling was present? And you just sit quietly and let yourself gradually go back in time and see if there was anything else pops into your memory. And because you're using the emotion to sort backwards in time, if there's one back there, it'll just pop into your memory. And then you write that down in your notes. Like write down a word or a phrase as a code word for that memory. And then let's say that you find one at 5 years old. After having discovered the 7-year-old one, and you also find one at 5 years old. Now you double check by, again, going back further to 5, to 4, to 3, and noticing if another event pops in. And then if the 5-year-old event was the earliest one, when you go back to 4 or 3, you're going to notice that that feeling is yet in your future from 4 or 3 years old. You're going to realize, I didn't know about that feeling at that time when I was 4 or 3. And then you can come back to the 5-year-old experience and say, that's very likely the first one. And the reason it's useful to identify the very first one is because everything that happens in your life after that first experience, everything that happens with circumstances that are similar to the original experience, every time you have an experience of that later on in your life, another layer gets added on to the original experience. And then you have another trigger. You get triggered again, and another layer gets added on. So it becomes like an onion. Just keep adding layers to it with events. And if you're unfortunate enough to never learn how to neutralize emotional trauma from your past, that'll be with you the rest of your life. And so it is possible, as we're going to actually do today, to neutralize it so that you never have to deal with it again in this lifetime. And it's important to find, as best you can, the original event, because that one is like the center seed inside the onion, so to speak. And when you work with that center seed and you neutralize the emotional event there, all the good things that happen from that just ripple out to the other layers and ripple out in a very generative way to the other layers. So getting the seed, getting the original event, identifying that to the best of your ability gives you the most bang for your buck when you actually go through the Remaking Your Past 7-step process, that structured daydream. It'll give you the most happiness. It'll give you the biggest release and relief for yourself by finding the earliest one and working with that one first. And then, generally speaking, like in that example, I said to found one at 5, but that was the first one. There wasn't anything at 4 and 3. Work with the one at 5 years old, but we'd already, in this example, that person had found one at 7 years old. After doing the 5-year-old experience with the 7-step Remaking Your Past process, then symbolically or metaphorically moving ahead in time to the 7-year-old experience and doing the same 7-step process with that one. And then if there's another event, let's say at 10 or 12, you also then use the same process with the 10-year-old experience, the 7 steps. And then the same with the 12-year-old experience. And you only have to generally do that for the experiences that happen from 0 to 12. but there are exceptions, like the one for me at 16 and Carrie, the one for you at junior high. I'm assuming junior high was like 13 or 14 years old. Is that true? Yeah. Okay. But if you have events that happen, let's say at 19 and 20 and 25, you don't have to do the same process with them. It's just mainly you do the 7-step remaking your past process with everything you find between 0 and 12, always starting with the earliest one that you can identify, and up to and including anything that you find up to 12 years old. So oftentimes we will sometimes find, 2, 3, or 4 in that range from the first one, 2 or 3 or 4 events from the first one at, say, 3 years old to 12 years old, that the 3 or 4 events in there to work with and do this process with. And always, of course, I'll reiterate, do the earliest ones first and work your way forward in time, back in the direction of the present. So we're working with remaking your past and neutralizing trauma and emotional conditioning from your youth. And here there are the 7 transformations, and we're working with number 3 today, remaking your past. And there's 4 more to go over the next couple of months. And for this one right here, in the remaking your past process on this slide is the 7-step process. And I think we have mostly, but I'm going to give you a few more minutes to complete. We've mostly identified the event. If you're planning on participating, live right here with us and going through it with us together as a group, you've identified. Well, first of all, you've identified a good recent example of something that upsets you and troubles you on a regular basis, or somewhat frequently. And the kind of upset that you've had, and if someone were to ask you, how far back does that negative feeling go? You say all the way back to when I was a kid, or when I'm talking with a client. Often they'll tell me something that happened last week. I'll ask them about the feeling, and they'll tell me about the feeling, and then I'll say, how long have you had that feeling? And they look at me like with incredulity, however you say that word, and they say forever. I've had it forever. Meaning that they know that it comes from when they were young. So here we've walked through a couple of us to identify the earliest event and to identify the core conclusion. And the core conclusion is always around 3 subjects. It's a conclusion about life, or it's a conclusion about your other people, or it's a conclusion about yourself. So like Carrie, for example, in your case, yours was around other people, that other people can be mean and cruel. Began with that. And then the core conclusion has a strategy so in the future, I'm going to, since my core conclusion is true, I'm going to do this. And yours, as an example, Carrie, was to work at becoming, I'm going to say, wonderfully sociable. And with that ability that you develop, able to gather some really good friends, so that you weren't alone and lonely. And that last part, so that you weren't alone and lonely, is the goal that you were after, and what you wanted to avoid. So not alone and lonely, but have the satisfaction of good friends and good relationships. So identifying that core conclusion is important. The conclusion might be about life. Life is going to be really difficult, is a frequent one I hear. Life is going to be a struggle. I hear that one frequently. So in the future, I'm going to, since it's going to be a struggle, I'm going to work hard, as absolutely hard as I can, to make everything work in my life so I can survive and be a success in my life and not be a failure. And conclusions about self are fairly common. Like you've got one, many of us have this one mixed in, that I'm not good enough. So in the future, I'm going to try much harder than anybody else to be good enough, so that I can feel good about myself and not feel like I'm a failure. Another core conclusion about self that's common is I don't fit in. I'm different from other people. Another variation is there's something wrong with me. I have a defect of some sort. And so a compensating strategy, so I'm going to hide. I'm going to be an introvert. I'm going to hold my peace and wait so that I can feel safe and not feel vulnerable to being judged. So those are the three different areas of important core conclusions about life, other people, and ourselves. So if you've written down some notes for yourself about those things, now we're ready to actually do the process itself. And so if you want to get yourself into a comfortable position, and I'm going to walk you through the 7 steps and explain a little bit about each one as we go along. And as we go along with the 7 steps, I'm going to encourage you to, when I give the instructions, only do the instructions. Do the instructions well, but see if you can stay with it by not getting ahead. And I'll see if I can help you out with that as we go along. So if you're in a comfortable spot, you're going to do what I call a structured daydream. It's a daydream, but it's structured in the sense that there are 7 things you need to accomplish during this daydream in sequence. And the method for you to use is, during this structured daydream, is to use your imagination and your creativity and your intuition, and you create as you go along, and be aware that sometimes we use the phrase, the sky is the limit. Well, actually, there's no limit, not even the sky. There's no limit to the kind of creativity and imagination you can bring to this process. The more imagination and creativity that you bring to it, the more memorable it will be for you, and the more positive it will be for your younger self. So in this structured daydream, you're going to go backwards in time and meet up with your younger self. And you're going to meet up with them before the event that you identified actually occurs, much like I did. I met up with my younger self several weeks before the event was going to occur for them, several weeks before it actually occurred to me when I lived through that life. And it's important to meet up with them before the event. I'll tell you some of the reason why that's important. I remember years ago, when I was somewhere, a decade and a half or 2 decades of doing executive coaching, I worked with a lot of business professionals, and I taught this process to many, many, many of them. And I used to teach them that they needed to go back to their younger self after the event occurred. In other words, so to speak, like after the damage was done. And that their job was to heal their younger self of what they had just gone through. And so one time I was working with a client and I gave that person those instructions, and I had to leave for a few moments. And so I said, go ahead and do that process. And when I come back, you fill me in on how it went. So when I came back, the client said, what I did was I went and met up with my younger self before the event even occurred. It just sounded to me like that was a lot simpler way to do it before the event even occurs and teach them how to handle it in advance of the event. And I listened to the client tell me the story of how that worked out. And I came away from meeting that client just like absolutely, totally impressed with what got accomplished by doing it that way. And I began doing it that way with every client after that. That it's much easier to help someone before they get into trouble than it is to help them after they get into trouble. Make sense? That you warn them and prepare them in advance. And so before doing it before the event, meeting up with your younger self before it happens is really an important part of the process. And then when you do meet up with them in this structured daydream, in a moment, I'm going to give you a few moments to carry out this step. When you do meet up with them, tell them who you are. Tell them you're from their future and they're actually them. And that you've come back to help them with a situation that is a few weeks down the road, or a few months down the road, or maybe a year down the road, that when you went through it in your lifetime, it was a real trauma. It was really difficult. And you're going to tell them that you came back there to help them so that they don't have to go through that. You're going to give them some coaching. And you can tell them that whatever the hard lessons were that were there to learn, that you learned them for both of you. And because you learned them from both of you, your younger self does not have to go through that. Absolutely does not have to experience that, can experience something dramatically different and better. And then in this one right here, this first step, you tell them a little bit of the story of what happened to you. Tell them a little bit of that story so that they get an idea of what you went through. And then stop. That's the end of step one. So you're going back there in time, meeting up with them before the event occurs, telling them you're from their future, you're actually them. Come back to help them with a situation that they're going to have a choice about in a few weeks or a few months. And then you tell them a little bit about what you went through and let them know that they don't have to go through that, that you're going to help them so they don't have to. And that whatever lessons were there to learn, that you've learned them for your younger self. Okay, I'm going to give you about a few minutes for that. So go ahead. Now also, I want you to know that in this process, you're doing it silently, so you don't have to use words like complete sentences when you're talking to your younger self. You can use telepathy, and that can be an advantage in being able to transfer, more information to your younger self by doing it telepathically. So keep that in mind. Step number 2, now you go back in with your younger self and tell them what you concluded, that conclusion that we identified. Tell them what you concluded and let them know that they do not need to conclude that. It's very important that they don't conclude that. Go ahead, and I'll give you about a minute to do that. Tell them what you concluded from your experience of that event, and that they must not conclude that. They don't need to conclude that. Okay, whenever you're ready, give me a thumbs up. Okay. And in step number 3, you give them what you would like to believe based on your life experience, everything you've learned from the challenges of your life, all the wisdom and maturity that you've acquired in your lifetime. And from all of that, you tell them this is what you recommend that they do conclude about life, or about other people, or about themselves. And in this part, you really embellish this, and you take time to really expand on what you want them to believe. So if it's, for example, about life, that you can say, and life for you is going to be absolutely wonderful. You're going to experience some of the most wonderful things in life, in relationships with yourself, and you have all the skills that you need. You have all the resources to handle things beautifully in your life, and that things can just fall into place for you, sometimes even like clockwork. And you can know that while there are sometimes people who can be angry for their own reasons, that the vast majority of people are wonderful people, that are caring people, that are people that you're going to be associating with in your life, and that they're going to care deeply about you like you care about them. And you're going to find great satisfaction with people that you become friends, dear friends with, and in relationships. And you are so deserving of life. You are an absolutely beautiful soul to your core. You have love, you have affection, you have compassion. You have all of those things. And you are a bright light that people are going to enjoy being with, have respect for. So you get the idea, you reverse the belief you told them about in the last step, and really, really embellish it. Use your intuition and your imagination to create a belief system in them that is absolutely wonderful for them. Okay, and take all the time that you need. I'll give you about 3 minutes for that. Okay, give me a thumbs up whenever you're complete with that step. Okay. And in step number 4, you're going to give your younger self 3 alternatives for how to handle the situation differently than you did the first time around for yourself. Give them 3 alternatives for how to do it differently and successfully. And there are 3 types of alternatives I want to talk with you about. The first one is where you give them an alternative where everything happens the same, but they believe differently. They believe more positively about it, that they have a completely positive outlook on it. The second type of alternative is where you give them the idea of how they could, an idea of how they could do it differently. Thereby, and do it differently and more successfully. And then in the third type of alternative, this is what I call the superhuman or the super alternative. You can give them, your younger self, superpowers and say you can use these superpowers as an alternative to handle this situation successfully. And so an example of a superpower is physical strength. So this is often used by people who have experienced physical abuse of some sort in their younger years. And that because of this superhuman strength, they're able to completely prevail in any situation that they find themselves in where they are threatened. And their strength completely overwhelms whoever there might be in that event that wants to do them harm. Same thing with any kind of physical abuse, whether it be physical or sexual or any other kind. And then the second type of superhuman power is where they have telepathy, where they can insert thoughts into another person's mind. Thoughts of love or thoughts of compassion in another person for someone who maybe was a part of that event that they're going through that needs those thoughts of love or compassion. And another type of superpower is to be able to telepathically erase bad intentions from a person's mind, so that you actually have them, they just forget about whatever bad intentions that they had. And then another way of giving superpower to your younger self is to have them have the capability of sending various kinds of energy to anyone who needs that energy in the form of like balls of light and colored energy, like a yellow ball of energy that brings someone, when your younger self sends it to that individual, brings them peace. Or a ball of blue energy that's, when your younger self sends that to someone, the blue energy heals that person. Or when someone, let's say, sends a ball of green energy to someone who needs healing of their own from their past. So there are a lot of options inside the third type of alternative of using superhuman powers. And inside of a structured daydream like this, again, the sky, there is no limit. There is no sky as the limit. Your younger self can have a plethora, a whole suite of superpowers to deal with the situation. And so when you give your 3 alternatives to your younger self, it doesn't have to be one of each kind. You can like give them one alternative where they do something differently, and give them 2 alternatives where they have superhuman options. And it's important to give them 3 to take the time to use your creativity, your imagination, to give them 3 alternatives, because you program in then a repertoire for them of ways to respond. Not just one, which isn't really a choice. If you only gave them one choice, it's not really a choice. They're stuck with that one. Even if you gave them 2, that's like a dilemma. Which one do they choose? So if you give them a suite of 3 or a repertoire of 3, that enables them to just use their intuition, their own intuition, to just, with a wise impulse, select the alternative that they want to do to more successfully handle this event that's coming up for them. Now, when you do this, don't go beyond. Sometimes people go beyond and have their person start to live through it. Wait on that. Just in this step, give them the 3 alternatives and stop there, and then I'll give you the next step, and it'll make perfect sense. Okay, and if everybody's okay to proceed, go ahead. I'll give you about 4 minutes for that. 3 alternatives. And I see some of you doing this, and that's a good idea to write down those 3 alternatives. Okay, just give me a thumbs up if you're ready. It looks like you are. Wonderful. Let's see. Now, during this next step, I'm not going to go back to the share screen right now because it's a fairly simple step. You've now given them 3 alternatives for how to handle things. Now, let them know that you are offering them complete freedom to choose. You're trusting them that they make the choice for which one they want to carry out. So, for example, you could say something like, now I've given you these 3 alternatives, but I want you to know that I trust you to make your own choice of what to do when the time comes. And you might choose one of the alternatives I've given you, or a combination of 2 of them, or you might come up with a 4th one, completely different and all on your own. Whatever you do, it's going to be the right choice, and I support it absolutely. The only reason you could make a mistake is if you got caught by surprise like I did. But in fact, you are totally prepared, and you have everything that you need in order to handle this situation perfectly and beautifully. Have all the resources and skills you need. Feel free. You have my absolute confidence. And then I think I'm going to give you the next one, which is step number 6. After you give them that encouragement and that freedom and that imbue them with your trust and support, then in the next step, you give them a hug or shake their hand, and you send them on their way to live through that experience, handling it in some different way. And when you send them off, you move to the side of the stream of time, and in your imagination, you're going to watch them in their timeline. You're going to watch them live through that experience, handling it in some wonderful, different way. And if your intuition moves you to do that, while you're watching them, if you have, let's say, the instinct to send them a ball of colored light with a certain energy resource, feel free to do that while they're doing it. You send that from your position at the side of the stream of time that they're living through, if you want to. But otherwise, just watch them live through that and handle it in some different way than you did successfully until that event is complete. And then I'll give you the very last step. So this is step number 5 and 6, express your confidence. Step number 5, and that you're giving them full freedom to choose. And step number 6, you send them off to live through that experience, handling it in some beautiful way, and you move to the side of the stream of time and watch them do it to a completion of that particular event. Okay, go ahead. I'll give you about 2 or 3 minutes to do that. Okay, whenever you're ready, come back to us. And for the last step, then you rejoin your younger self in the stream of time and congratulate them. Make a big deal out of it. Congratulate them for a job well and wonderfully done so that they feel even better about themselves, so that they feel fantastic. And give them a big hug. And you might include in that, if you're moved to do it, to make a promise that the two of you are going to be together with each other from now on and forever. And that you're going to be there for her. And then the two of you can join in some fashion, like give yourself a big hug and melt together, or give yourself each of you hug each other and then could turn and face the future together, like with your arms around each other's back and you're looking forward together side by side towards the future. However symbolically you want to, engage in this final configuration with your younger self. Okay, take about a minute to do that. Go ahead. Okay, whenever you're ready, rejoin us. Okay, I'd like to hear from a few of you, anyone who would like, share what your younger self, what alternative they chose and what they did. I think I'm going to just be bold and start with you, Carrie. And the reason I'm going to start with you is because I saw when you were making up the alternatives, I saw this big grin on your face as you were telling your younger self whatever the alternatives were that you were coming up with.
Okay. Well, what keeps coming up for me now is this person that I'm developing this relationship with. If I don't get a response back right away, then I think, they're not interested, I'm not worthy and stuff. And then I kind of went back to, way back to when I was like 5 or 7, and I had a crush on a friend of mine, and I liked him, but the feelings were never reciprocated. We were good friends, but never reciprocated.
Yeah, wow.
And what I got out of the whole thing is that I try to make things work out that just weren't meant to be. And that I was telling myself that I don't need to control the outcome, that the universe always leads me on the right path. I just keep taking detours, which become a dead end. So I get in the way. And then I was telling myself that I'm worthy of true love. I'm worthy of a healthy relationship, and that I'm a good girl and I'm a beautiful soul. And then I wrote down the 3 things. When I think of that person, they come up in my mind. I know that they're thinking of me, and what I do is I send them a smile of hello. So instead of thinking, oh, they don't want to have anything to do with me, turn the thought around and just send a smile with hello. And then the second one is just be yourself. Because if you want someone in your life, you want to be able to be yourself, the good and the bad and the ugly. And then then the third thing was, if I started to go in the negative way, to turn it around, think of that person and put a heart around the two of us. It doesn't mean that it's a loving relationship, whatever. It's just harmony, that it's good. It's not bad. And then the last part at the end was that I just put a heart around myself, and that something that I've said to myself for years. It's what Louise Hay has always said, and it's, I love myself. And the universe reflects that back to me. So if I'm loving myself, I'll get that in return instead
Yeah.
of those negative thoughts. So that's what I came up with.
Yeah. So that last part, loving myself, is such a wonderful thing. And I know for myself, I sometimes fall out of that temporarily before I realize. So you went back to a 5-year-old one?
It was between 5 and 7. I think I was 5. There was this family that we were very good friends with, and there were twin brothers and a cousin, and we were all the same age.
Yeah.
And we all did everything together. And then I think about 7 years old, I had a crush on one of the twins. They moved away. I lived in Los Angeles. They moved away to the San Fernando Valley when we were about 7. And when I was about 10, 11, we moved to the San Fernando Valley, and they ended up living right around the corner from us, not even knowing. And I always had, this crush on him, but a couple of times I was embarrassed because somebody that I would meet as a friend ended up being his girlfriend. So he actually ended up marrying one of them. But, now as I look at it all, he would never have been the right person for me. He had a major drug problem. He, a lot of stuff. And it's like, there's like an angel that watches over me. But like I said, I take these detours. I try to control things instead of just letting the universe kind of move it on.
Yeah.
Just, it's not a bad or good thing. It's just not what's meant to be. And I just have always tried to control it.
Yeah. And so what's your state of being now?
Well, for me, the biggest word for me always has been, I feel peaceful. I have to feel peaceful. And I find that one of the things that really supports me, I'm not diligent about it, but I do it as much as I can, is I start off my day with at least a 10-minute meditation. And the meditation gathers my thoughts together, and my day is so peaceful. I mean, it's better than I could have. I have magical surprises, and I find that when I don't, it can be chaotic.
Yeah. That's a good learning. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about loving myself. And I say to myself every day, I do my journaling, and I'm just grateful to be awake. I'm grateful that I can look at things. I know that I'm a reactor, and then I think about it. So if something comes up and I'm in the middle of it, I have to give myself 24 hours to go through all my drama in my head, all the stories, and then 24 hours later, I can take a look at it. So
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that.
you're welcome.
Appreciate that. Okay, one or two more. What alternative did your younger self do? Uh, okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Well, first, I want to thank you because I really believe that you are a disciple and you have transformed my life. And once more, you have transformed me to remembering that I am created in pure love, that I am a creation of God's love, that I have chosen this life to fulfill my karma and my reincarnation, my destiny, and that I must daily connect to the higher power because I forget and I allow the enemy, the negative thinking, to overcome my purpose, my legacy. And it's like walking in fire to get the dross off, to serve the karma, to fulfill my destiny, and to continue the legacy that God gave me in returning back to the earth. And that legacy lies in my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandbabies, continuing my father's work my way as a teacher. But most importantly is my daily connection with God and knowing that I was created in pure love, and how I can forget that by not using daily discipline and practice and meditation. And as I shared with you before, I feel that this is my last time here on earth. And so I am fulfilling my destiny, and I will and am leaving a mark for a better world.
Wonderful. So, were you able to do the exercise okay?
Oh, it was powerful.
Okay.
It's always powerful with you.
Okay. Well, one of the things often hear from people is that their younger self actually makes the choice that surprises them, that they're pleasantly surprised, but surprised nonetheless. So I know I've had that experience a couple of times when I've done this remaking your past work, and it's good to know that over the years, I don't know how much. I'm going to say I've probably done it 6 or 7 times, where I have found something from my past that I had overlooked, or maybe not overlooked, but it hadn't been triggered, or it doesn't get triggered very often. And then when it did get triggered, that was my signpost. That was my indicator. Okay, there's something there for me to work remaking your past process with. And so for me, if I look back over those things that I've done, it's been happifying. It's brought more joy to more ease to my life. It's neutralized, some of the negative triggers that I used to have much more frequently. Not that I don't have any negative triggers anymore. I still do have some, but when they happen, if I find another one, I'm going to go to work on a remaking your past process if it looks like it's something that came from the back. But it's all about happifying your life and bringing
I
more
also
joy.
need to mention that what was surprising to me is using the overwhelm, the chaos, the confusion, and the suffering as a protection. That's from the old past. And that's why it's so important that I use discipline and remember I am a super being. And I must connect with God, my higher guides, Elijah, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit daily, moment by moment, every time I get caught up in my old ways, because it's so easy to lose control and to let those old patterns take over.
Yeah. Thank you, Cheryl.
Oh, and one last thing was I used white light when I was walking away, bright white light with the two of us hand in hand.
Wonderful.
So thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, anyone else? We're just about ready to conclude here. Go ahead, Denise.
Well, I won't go too much. I'm just surprised that I'm not in tears because I've been in tears for the last 2 weeks, but and today I don't seem to have any left. But I always seem to go to that superpower thing. I like that.
Yeah,
I guess
I kind of like it too.
I'm kind of a control freak, so to have a superpower is kind of cool with a magic wand that I can do whatever with. But I like the fact that she was able to go and she went in a positive way to be a healer. Because I realized that maybe my being alone and left alone there just wasn't enough time. I mean, my brother was born, a lot of things, my family was rearranging locations and, so there just wasn't a lot of time. And I never really touched on that before, that everybody had stuff to do and everybody was frazzled probably, and they just needed more time to take care of things. So she was able to go in and give them compassion and calm with her little wand, and everybody had enough time. And then that created a calm that then everybody could love each other. And then I could go out into the world and meet people and have friends and, have a happy life. So that was really pleasant. And I think one of the things too that I got out, I mean, I've been with you for a long time and I've done a lot of work, but I think one of the things maybe perhaps that I was missing was way back when I took your class, Remaking Your Past, and I made the list of the things, that where you keep going back and going back. And I never really went in and went forward doing the other pieces and parts. Like you were just saying that, you worked on one and then you worked on the next one and the next one. And I didn't do that. So maybe that's why I keep coming back and having to revisit some of this overwhelm or pain of sadness and things like that, because there's still some back there that are incomplete. So
Yeah.
thank you for that, because I will work on that.
Yeah. Well, thank you too, Denise, for highlighting that, because although I mentioned it earlier, I don't know if I was explicit enough that when you have time when you're working with yourself, like we don't have time to go through all of them here in a workshop, but when you're working with yourself, like if there's a 5-year-old experience, well, if you're going backwards in time and you find one at 10 and you find one at 8 and you find one at 5, you work on the 5-year-old one. And then when you have time with yourself, you work on then the 8 and 10-year-old one in sequence. And I think that's what you're pointing at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you get all of the ones handled that happen during 0 to 12 that are part of that particular emotional configuration, that particular emotional discomfort. They're all on the same string, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good. That's
Thank
good.
you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna ask one more time, but Anne, thank you for that chat. Having a lovely time with your 5-year-old. Wonderful. I am loved no matter what. Yeah, excellent. I'm going to just share my screen here once again in conclusion. And here we left off, and express your confidence and move to the side of the stream of time and rejoin and congratulate. And there are energy vibrations that go along that you create when you do a Remaking Your Past process, all of the steps. In the first step, when you go back and you meet up with your younger self, you're doing it out of compassion. Compassion that is for your younger self, but that compassion bleeds over in a wonderful way to yourself as well. And so that inner state is there, that vibration, that energy. Then when you tell your younger self what you experienced, the difficulties that you went through, that's authenticity and openness with your younger self, letting them know what they can escape, so to speak, and what you went through. And then in step 3, you're giving them what you want them to experience about themselves, the positivity in terms of how they look at life, how they look at themselves, how they look at other people. And that comes from just a deep desire to help and encourage your younger self. And then when you come up with the alternatives, creativity, intuition, imagination are all involved. And one of the reasons for giving 3 alternatives is I often get feedback from working with people that in the weeks and months after they do the Remaking Your Past process, they run into a situation that would have normally triggered the original feeling. And one of the other alternatives pops up and they do it. One of the other alternatives that was presented, but that wasn't utilized in the original re-imprinting or the original Remaking Your Past process, it shows up later, a few months later, from having the repertoire of 3 choices. So that's always an interesting result when I hear people tell me that. And then in step 5, you express deep confidence and trust in your younger self, and that is to yourself as well. And then when you watch your younger self handle it, there's an observation that when you watch them handle it well, there's awe and joy and surprise and love, and it builds your spirit. It's happifying to see them. It's joyful. And then the love commitment at the end and having a vow of being together with your younger self. The negative emotional conditioning of the original event then is neutralized. And so what you may expect is that, first of all, notice your state of being when you're done with the process. But second, this is something you're going to notice over the coming days. You will not anymore be able to remember the original event without the new event that you just created today coming into your mind almost simultaneously. They both will occur to you in your consciousness at the same time. And when that happens, the usual situations then that used to trigger it won't trigger it anymore. The 2 events being together like that in the circuitry of your brain, they neutralize the emotion. And this is going to occur very naturally, almost without you even noticing it. The triggers will happen, and you may or may not even notice that you come through the trigger not experiencing the emotion at all, and you handle it in some different positive way. Because it's programmed at a very, very deep level. You don't have to think about doing anything different after doing this particular work on this particular emotional configuration. So minus this trigger, I'm speaking for myself as well, that it has immeasurably brought more happiness to my life, brought more joy to my life by neutralizing, one by one, some of these triggers that used to be a much more regular part of my life. So now in 2 weeks, I'm going to introduce you to the next transformation. We're going to get into enhancing your native, natural spirituality 2 weeks from now. So this is where we're going. We have 3 to go after that one, but number 4 is maximizing your natural native spirituality. Anyone have anything? Yeah, go ahead, Denise.
Oh, I was just going to say, my eyes kind of play tricks on me sometimes. And when you had it up there on the screen, I saw the RYP.
Yeah.
And my brain went to RIP. So it was like kind of funny because I thought, well, once you remake your past, you can rest in peace.
There's
So,
truth to that.
so sometimes my eyes being bad is a good thing.
Yeah, it's a serendipitous event.
Hmm.
Yeah. Go ahead, Cheryl. Let's see. I'll unmute you. Give me a second. Okay,
Question.
go ahead.
I'm not here when you have the next workshop. Did you not say that I can go on YouTube to watch it?
Yes, exactly. Let's see. You're on the mailing list, like, for example, with this one, this coming Friday, I will send out an email to everyone here who is here or who is signed up for the 7 workshop series, including you. You'll get an email telling you that this workshop has been uploaded, and there will be 3 now. And
So
you're
I
going
can catch it. I can
Yeah.
get it.
And you actually, last Friday, I sent out an email for those 2 that were already recorded.
I had found those.
Okay,
Yes.
and that link is the same all the time.
I don't know where it is though.
Okay,
You'll send
so
out a new one
it's
though.
good. I send it every Friday.
I appreciate everybody. I thank you. I wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is a time for me to be thankful for all the beautiful things in my life, including the hard lessons, which are blessings in disguise. Namaste. Thank you, Michael. You are truly a disciple of God, and I honor you with gratitude.
Thank you, Cheryl. Wonderful. Okay. And anyone else have any final thoughts? Okay, wonderful. And I want to wish you to everybody here who may happen to celebrate that holiday coming up in a week or so. Have a happy time with it. And if you're watching here by way of the replay, the recording, my dearest hope, and I think all of us here hope for you that you have gotten the most wonderful experience that more and more happifies your life and brings joy to your life. All of us send our best to you all and to each other over the next fortnight. Adios for now. See you in a fortnight. All of our best to you.
Namaste.
Michael.
Bye for now.